Yeah, I think the answer to that question is we don't know. Everyone who's risen in this chamber in opposition to the cap so far has really the implication in their opposition has been that we need to tax some more, we need to spend some more, we need to protect the taxing and the spending that we do. I am so unbelievably in favor of a tax cap. It just makes me want to jump out of my shoes. Problem is, I'm not in favor of this tax cap. Last year I made a promise to the families and the employers of the 121st District. I promised them that I will vigorously pursue job creation through tax cuts and spending reductions. This property tax cap bill raises taxes and allows this legislature to continue to spend without restraint. This is being marketed as a 2% property tax cap, but the cap isn't there. There are carve-outs, there are exceptions that will allow taxes to continue to rise, and there's no spending control within this bill because there's no relief from unfunded state mandates. Only the New York State Legislature could pass a tax increase without actually knowing how large it is and continue spending without restraint and call it a tax cap. The taxpayers will be astonished later on this year and next year when their property taxes continue to rise because they believe that we're under a tax control regime. In this bill, there is no cap. This bill, in my opinion, this is going to be a political vote on a political bill designed for political advertising next year. Now, I consider myself to be a fairly reasonable person. At least I like to think that I am, and I try to be reasonable. I understand the art of compromise. I understand, the art of taking half a loaf in order to move the marker down the field, in order to advance an idea incrementally. But my friends, I want us to understand here that that's not what's happening. This 2% property tax cap is not incremental tax control. It's institutionalizing tax increases. A 2% cap is no cap at all. It's a guaranteed 2% tax increase. Why do I say that? In a no-cap environment, there will be some years, usually election years, when property taxes won't go up. And the reason that local governments can do that is because they know that in ensuing years, they can raise taxes 2% or 4% or 10% or whatever they want. But in a tax cap environment, in an environment where property taxes are capped, local governments, whether they need to from a budgetary standpoint or not, will go to the cap virtually every year in an attempt to build a reserve fund for years when they'd like to go to the cap or exceed the cap, but they can't. Now, some people will say, well, let's look at Massachusetts. They've had some success with their cap. Massachusetts is interesting, but it's irrelevant because their success isn't tied to their tax cap. The reason the Massachusetts model has worked is something very simple. It's called comparative advantage. New York and New Jersey have significantly larger populations than Massachusetts. Those populations are wealthy and mobile, and they live under a significantly larger tax burden than Massachusetts has. That gives Massachusetts a comparative advantage over New York and New Jersey when families and employers are looking for a home. The Massachusetts model doesn't apply for New York because New York is the highest taxing, highest spending state in the nation. We have no opportunity to create a comparative advantage with any other state, certainly not when we institutionalize annual 2% property tax increases. Any tax cap that's above zero is a tax increase, plain and simple. And it's a tax increase that we cannot afford in this state because it's a job killer. New York State, we are worst in the nation on taxing. We collect more state income tax per capita than any other state. We collect more state and local income tax per capita than any other state. We collect more state and local corporate tax than every other state except for Alaska because of their oil industry, and we'll take back the #1 spot once we start hydrofracking. Only a handful of states collect more state and local sales tax than we do. Only California has a higher gas tax than New York, and that's just by 0.4 of a penny. Only 2 states have higher cell phone taxes than New York. New York State even has the highest cigarette excise tax in the country, which I don't have a problem with, which may shock some of you. I don't have a problem that our cigarette excise tax is the highest in the country, but I'm afraid that it's not highest because we're most adamant about discouraging smoking. I'm afraid that our cigarette excise tax is highest in the country because that's just what we do. We want to be first in the highest taxes in the country. Now let's talk about property taxes. New York State, we collect more property tax per capita than any other state. For owner-occupied housing as a percentage of home value, 9 of the 10 highest tax counties in the country are in New York State. My own county, Onondaga, has the 7th highest property taxes in the country. Not in the state, in the country. Set all of that taxing against the fact that we are no higher than 6th in the nation in income per capita, and you can see where the problem lies. We do not have a revenue problem in this state. We are not undertaxed. I am unconvinced by the argument that if we just tax a little more, give just a little bit more to the state, then all of our problems will be solved. We will have paid for whatever we need to pay for. We can all breathe a sigh of relief. It is absurd to argue that in the highest tax state in the nation, we don't collect enough taxes. We do not need, and we cannot afford, annual 2% property tax increases. You know, we need real tax relief in this state. Everyone who's risen to this point has defended the current system. I proposed a new idea. Someone said somewhere that we need a proposal that actually caps taxes. I've proposed legislation that's a 0% property tax cap. 0% is an honest, genuine cap that stops property taxes from rising so that we don't need gimmicks like a circuit breaker. A circuit breaker is supposed to help, you know, our elderly, our indigent, our infirm, so that they don't have to worry about being taxed out of their homes. Under a 0% cap, they don't have to worry about being taxed out of their homes because their property taxes won't rise. Now, 0%, you know, the street says 0% is pretty harsh. Everyone with an interest in growing government makes the same argument. They say caps are draconian. They say caps are a blunt instrument. They claim that state and local governments can't survive under something as reactionary as a tax cap. Nonsense. Every other major tax that we impose in this state is capped. Sales tax is capped, 3% with a 1% extender. Income tax is capped at a number of levels. In fact, the debate about raising the millionaire's tax is fundamentally a debate about exceeding the income tax cap. The corporate tax, capital gains tax, and state taxes are all capped in the same manner. They cannot exceed a particular level. Property tax is the only tax that's not capped, and it needs to be capped. Because, look, let's be honest. The reason the seniors, our seniors and our working families can't afford homes is because the property tax is not a tax on property. It's a tax on income. It just happens to be, it's an income tax. It just happens to be figured on the value of a person's home instead of the value of their paycheck. But it's still paid for out of current income. A person's primary residence doesn't generate revenue, and that's why our seniors cannot afford to keep their homes, and that's why our working families can't afford to buy homes. A 0% property tax cap is the first step in the right direction toward helping our seniors and our indigent. Our problem is not on the taxing side. Our problem is on the spending side. So how do we handle the spending side? Well, not with the bill before us today. This bill does virtually nothing to control state mandates, funded or unfunded. My proposal for a 0% property tax cap contains in it complete mandate relief for local governments, towns, villages, counties, schools. You know, we tell the locals, we tell the locals what to do. We tell them how to do it. We tell them when to do it. We do it with precision. Sometimes we even do it with a little bit of flair. But we don't do it with any money. In fact, we hide the true size of our spending problem here in Albany by forcing state programs onto the locals for them to pay for. Schools are a great example of this. Every year, people go to the polls and they vote on their school budgets. They believe that they're voting to approve or reject their local spending plan, but you and I know that they're not. Somewhere around between 90 and 95% of those school budgets are driven by us. We're telling them what they're going to spend their money on. Occasionally a budget goes down and a district will go to contingency, and taxpayers are shocked that the contingency budget is higher than the budget they just rejected. Why? State mandates. That's us. And you'll often hear the argument that schools can't survive under a cap. And that's true if there's no mandate relief. In my bill, there's complete mandate relief, which returns budget control and decision-making to school districts and local governments, and that saves our schools. And for that reason alone, with no mandate relief in the current bill, for that reason alone, it's worth voting against this bill. But I'll tell you what, even under this current bill, as bad as it is, the argument that schools can't survive a tax cap is bogus. Property taxes are not a dedicated revenue stream for schools. And a property tax cap does not define the limit of education spending. A property tax cap defines the limit of property taxing. We could cut taxes in New York State, taxes and spending across the board, 10%. If we wanted to, and still increase education funding. It's simply a matter of priorities for us. So what about the argument we can do a 2% cap today and drive it down later? Or we can do a cap now and get real mandate relief later on. I worked in Washington long enough to recognize that one. Don't you believe it. Don't believe it. Mr. Speaker, my constituents and all New Yorkers need honest tax relief. And we only get that with a 0% property tax cap, not with the bill that's before us today. And we need genuine spending controls. We only get that with real mandate relief, not with the bill that's before us today, which is virtually silent on mandate relief. Today might not be the day for a 0% property tax cap, but neither should it be the day for a 2% cap that could be who knows how much. I made promises to my constituents back home. I promised them that I would not vote for a cap that's above 0. I promised them I would only vote for mandate relief that actually relieves and saves school districts and local governments. And I promised them I wouldn't vote for any of those proposals if they weren't included in the same bill. Unfortunately, as much as I like the idea of a tax cap, and as much as I'm going to continue to fight for a good one, this bill tonight, for me, based on the promises that I made to my constituents, fails on all 3 counts. Thank you, sir.